Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much for joining this Cambridge Centre for Evaluation and Monitoring webinar on how to use adaptive baseline assessment to build a plan for exam success. I have just a few pieces of housekeeping before we get started. So please note that your microphones are muted. We cannot hear any members of the audience, and this is to ensure good sound quality. If you would like to ask questions, and please do, please post them in the questions section of the GoToWebinar control panel or put them in the chat. We'll see them in either place, and we've set aside a couple of points throughout the webinar where we'll go through and answer your questions. You'll receive a certificate of attendance, which will be sent to your email inbox 1 hour after the webinar finishes, and you'll receive a copy of the webinar recording and slides sent to you via email next week. So that's everything from me. I'll now hand over to Suzanne Tipping, who's one of our assessment advisors. Over to you, Suzanne.
Thank you, Megan. Yeah, so as Megan said, I'm Suzanne Tipping and I'm an assessment advisor at KEM. And part of my role is to provide specialist knowledge, advising schools on the benefits and uses of KEM's assessments right across the range from early years to post-16. So I work really closely with schools and colleges to support their ongoing school improvement and future assessment strategies. And my background is in secondary school teaching. I was a former teacher of business, IT and economics and taught through the ages of 11 to 18 and I did that for about 20 years and along that time I've had various different roles, including time as a subject lead and a deputy head of year in a pastoral role as well. And just a little bit about KEM. We are the Centre for Evaluation and Monitoring. We're part of the Cambridge University Press and Assessment family, and we've been used by educational professionals for almost 40 years. It's actually our 40th birthday this year, and we're now used in over 90 countries. And KEM is one of the largest and longest established providers of adaptive, formative and baseline assessments for children of all ages from early years to post-16. And our methods are research-based, they're evidence-driven and market-tested and built on a foundation of non-commercial academic practice. And today we're going to talk about how can your school or trust support and prepare your students for exam success. And we're specifically talking about our adaptive baseline assessments for post-16. And we're going to talk about how they can be used to assess student ability, to predict outcomes for A-levels and IBE, and also as a tool for intervention to improve school performance. So my colleague David Martin is actually going to tell you some more specific information about our post-16 baseline assessment, which is ALICE. But I'm just going to give you kind of some headline summary information. It will provide you with baseline data, including standardized scores, individual student record sheets and cohort ability profiles. It provides predictive data, including subject-specific predictions and also chances graphs, which David's going to show you in more detail later on. And it will also provide you with value-added data. And again, he'll tell you a little bit about that in his presentation. So I want to focus on really how ALICE can help you improve exam performance. And, we hope that ALICE can really give your students a better chance to fulfill their potential and enjoy academic success. And you can use ALICE and the data it provides at different stages of that journey. So first of all, when you carry out the assessment, as I said, David will tell you more about that later. But we do have ALICE, which is an assessment for 16 to 18-year-olds, which is usually carried out at the start of year 12. And David's going to talk you through the assessment, and he's going to talk to you about the adaptive nature of ALICE and how that can give a more accurate reading of student ability levels and how it generates A-level and IBE predictions. But another great thing about it is that it's an assessment that you can carry out that involves no teacher marking, so no additional workload in that respect. And the reports that it generates are really quick, easy and reliable. They're easily accessible for teachers, they're easy to understand and they're easy to interpret. And then at the analyse stage, the baseline assessment provides you with a starting point for each student. It tells you where they're at in terms of their ability levels and aptitudes in certain areas. So it allows you to identify where there may be learning gaps. You can see what the student's strengths and weaknesses are right at the start of their Key Stage 5 journey, and communicate this data to the right people so that it can help to inform their planning. And this puts you on the first step towards exam success as you identify expected progress for each of your students. Some schools use these predictions as direct subject target grades set by the leadership teams. Some will adjust them after looking at the chances graphs, and some schools I've spoken to communicate this information to teachers who are then involved in the process of target setting, triangulating the predictions data that we provide with their professional judgment and knowledge about their students. But that data can then be used to inform planning, to really set the students up for success. So for example, you can use our chances graphs report to discuss with students and parents the probability of a particular outcome at A level, so they understand that the predictions are not a given and that other outcomes are possible, and really drive home the fact that their dedication, effort, attendance and revision and independent study will have a real impact on their outcomes. And the baseline data can be used to support planning in the classroom. So when developing schemes of learning, if you use the baseline data effectively, you can build in appropriate support and challenge that match the ability levels of students in a particular cohort or in a specific class. And this can be built into not just classroom lessons, but also homework tasks, coursework assignments, in addition to work that's being carried out in the classroom setting. The baseline data may also indicate that there is a need to support students in terms of their non-verbal ability, and this might indicate that there's a need to support students in terms of their study skills as well as course content. And tutorial time in sixth form or college is an ideal time to work on the concepts of growth mindset, their organisation skills, time management, and also revision skills. A focus on how to learn is useful, especially given the increase in independence that students have in sixth form and college compared to year 11 at school, whether that be providing time to watch motivational videos like TED Talks, time to plan independent study time. So when will they do their homework? How long will they dedicate to each subject? Can you support them in creating revision timetables that have built-in breaks and leisure time to reduce burnout and anxiety? And even teaching students different revision techniques, as even though they've just completed GCSE exams, some students still haven't yet found a way of revising that works for them. And our baseline data can be used in the teaching phase as well. So once you have your plans and you know exactly what you want to do with your students to try and increase their outcomes and improve exam performance, having those accurate A-level predictions really allows you to monitor and track student progress, and you can compare current performance to their predictions along the way. So are they working at a level which is in line with the predictions? And are you then providing clear next steps and feedback, which is then going to close any of those learning gaps? And this can be used to support conversations with students and parents regarding progress. Knowing pupils' vocabulary, maths and non-verbal ability levels will allow teachers to differentiate their learning in a relevant way. So, for example, as a business and economics teacher, which I formerly was, having this type of data would identify for me which students might need additional support in the form of subject-specific vocab glossaries, scaffolding with sentence starters for essays, formula sheets for calculating percentage changes or financial calculations such as revenue, profit, or average rate of return on investment, for example. And it would allow me to see who might require some additional support in terms of exam technique. So in terms of, I might deliver lessons specifically or parts of lessons on how to scan and skim a case study or extract and apply theory to a specific context. And modelling and exemplar materials, exemplar answers really helped with that. And practicing exam answers under timed conditions and practicing proofreading might also be needed depending on their ability levels in the non-vocab area. And of course, afterwards, you can reflect on actual outcomes. And again, David will talk about value added, but baseline assessment does give you data to compare actual outcomes to with value added reports on results day. So this will allow you to measure the impact of that teaching and all of that planning and identify where best practice can be shared and also which areas can be focused on for future school improvement. So the data really can be used by a wide range of people within school, whether that be senior leaders or directors at a MAT level, whether it's leadership of an individual school or leaders of a particular year group. You've got your classroom teachers who can use that data, but it can also be shared with students and their parents as well to really inform them where they're currently at and what work needs to be done to achieve those predicted grades. So I'll just very briefly just give you an idea of specifically how different people in the school might use the baseline data to support exam performance. So as I mentioned, directors and senior leaders at MAT level might use it to support MAT evaluation. So using standardised assessments and scores across all schools in the trust can be really useful. And it will help to identify strengths and weaknesses at a multi-academy trust level. So that then can support directors and senior leaders in deciding where they might be best to allocate resources, identify opportunity to share good practice between schools to really improve performance overall across the whole MAT. And in individual schools, senior leadership teams can use their predictive data to review indicators of potential exam performance, and it will develop evidence-driven intervention strategies so they know exactly which students need what type of intervention. And that will, again, allow them to allocate resources. It helps to aid HR planning, so you know what people you need in place to deliver that support, and of course challenge as well. And also it can allow you to plan CPD, and also you can use it to calculate value added. In sixth forms and colleges, if you have heads of year 12 and year 13, or even tutors for students in those year groups, then on a pastoral level, it does help you to identify when you're using the data to monitor and track progress, which students are perhaps coasting, they're not quite fulfilling their potential. You can see who's really pushing themselves and exceeding expectations. So it allows encouragement, care, support, all to be applied in the right places in the right way to the right students. Heads of department, subject leads will use this data to understand the ability levels of students who are studying their subjects in their classes, and they can use it to make sure that the schemes of learning that are being developed for sixth form classes do include the right support, the right challenge, the right differentiated resources to support the ability levels of the students in that cohort. And that can be drilled down even further by teachers. If the teachers have the KEM student profiles and they have information from the ALICE data, it'll help to give a snapshot of each of their pupils as an individual learner. And that will allow the teachers to not only form individual expectations of those students based on an external reference point, not just their own assessments, but you know, they can also use the scores to influence subject level target grades, and also to make sure that classroom resources, homework resources are differentiated to suit the needs of the students in class. And the SENCO learning support assistance tiers, if you have them at Key Stage 5, then you know the baseline test can provide a preliminary screening for additional learning needs where they're not diagnostic of specific learning difficulties in any way. Especially if you have new students coming to you or students with limited information from a previous school, it can help to identify areas where they might have a particular difficulty, and it can help you to identify that quite early on. So it'll help support staff as well understand what kind of support might be needed outside of the classroom, and where group or one-to-one intervention might be needed with students as well. Sharing chances graphs with students is great in supporting them in understanding that you know they're not guaranteed a particular predicted grade, but you know there are other grades that they could potentially achieve, and so therefore it really does rely on their dedication, commitment to their studies, and that additional revision and independent study time to be used wisely as well, to ensure that they have success in their sixth form subjects and qualifications. But we do have parent reports as well, which explain the baseline assessment. They explain what it is, why we carry it out, what it actually assesses, and it's written in plain English in a way that anyone can understand, so they really know why the assessment's being carried out and how the data is used to support them in all of the ways that I've already mentioned. So before I pass on to David, just some kind of final thoughts from me, or a summary of what I've said so far. Our ALICE assessment does provide baseline data that is a snapshot of a student's current ability levels at the time that the assessment's taken. And it does provide predictive data in the form of chances graphs, which provides the data there shows the probabilities of achieving a range of grades rather than giving a single predicted grade, which can be really useful as well. It's a really useful tool to aid learning conversations with students, motivational conversations, and also support discussions with parents and manage expectations in that area as well. And it can provide teachers with a holistic understanding of students' abilities and circumstances when used alongside those conversations. Our baseline assessments will provide you with that data, but then discussing it with key people and sharing the data and making sure that everybody who sees the data understands it fully is really key. And it's the key to answer better questions, whether that be of teaching staff or of students or to parents. It really does hold the key, and it allows you to set realistic and aspirational expectations for students, and so that with teachers' help and support as well, then the teachers understand the expectations of their students, and it manages the expectations of parents as well. And also, it's key to informing teaching and learning strategies in the classroom to give the students the best chance of achieving their best predicted outcome. So ultimately, it's the people that will make the difference, not the data. But we can provide you with that data that people within your school can then use to really help support exam performance and make a difference. So David, I'll hand over to you now so you can tell us a little bit more about ALICE.
Thank you, Suzanne. I think that set things up very nicely for me to take everybody through the assessment itself. So if I can just share my screen, thank you. Okay, so hopefully you can all see my screen there. So we're going to talk about, let me just get rid of that update thing. We're just going to talk about the post-16 assessment itself. So we'll have a look at it. I've got some examples to show you of question areas and so on. We've also got some example reports to have a look at as well. So ALICE post-16 assessment, it is a baseline test. It is a formative assessment, and it is designed really to give schools a measure of the abilities of their students at that particular point in time. So because it is a baseline test, it is usually administered at the start of the academic year. The sooner schools have access to the data, the more sort of benefit I think it will be to them. The assessments are actually available throughout the academic year, so even if you had a few late starters, the assessment is still there. It's available throughout the entire academic year, so any students who maybe join school a little bit later than the majority, you will want to still have a baseline result, a baseline measure for those students, so they can basically sit the test as and when they actually join the school or college. But it is really all about getting that measure of each individual student's aptitudes for learning. As Suzanne mentioned, we can predict from this low stakes baseline test, there isn't a pass, there isn't a fail on the test itself. It's nothing for the students to be concerned about. It's really all about getting that measure of ability, and we can use that measure of ability to look at potential future high-stakes subject exam performance. So we will talk about how we do that a little bit later on during this presentation. But I wanted to just highlight some of the key features of the ALICE IB. It is the same test, it's just badged slightly differently if you are an IB only school, but having a little look at some of the key features of the assessment itself. So it is a computer adaptive assessment. There isn't any sound, so we don't need to worry about headphones or anything like that, but it is an adaptive assessment. That means basically that the assessment is capable of reacting to the answers that the students give. Okay, so we will talk more about that, I think, on the next slide. Standardized test administration. All students should have exactly the same experience when they do the test. Because of that, we can then standardize their results to compare how your students have scored, maybe compared to other students that have taken the same test, because we will have all had the same experience while we were doing the test itself. It is inclusive for all, so we do have an extra time version available. So the standard time version will last around about 55 minutes, you know, probably an hour or so by the time the students have came in, sat down and so on. But there is a 25% more time available. And that is really designed so that those students who maybe would receive additional time in any other kind of task they might do within school, they can also be assigned the 25% more time version of this baseline test. It's really all about making sure that every student has an equal opportunity to show you what they can do. You know, we don't want anybody to be disadvantaged if they maybe take a little bit longer to process instruction or process questions. We want everybody to be able to show exactly what they can do. It is a single test, so it is designed to be taken all in one sitting. It has adaptive but also non-adaptive sections. And the overall aim is to provide that measure of the developed ability of the student. Developed ability, capacity to learn, potential, that's what we're looking to provide schools with from the baseline assessment itself. With Post 16, we do have an additional baseline available as well. So you can do the online adaptive test. The result would then be used as a baseline measure, but you can also tell us basically what your student's average GCSE or IGCSE score is, and then we can use that as an alternative baseline as well. So we've got two ways of actually measuring the ability. We can have that prior measure of ability, which would be the student's achieved average GCSE results, and we can have that measure of the student's ability at this particular moment in time, where we have the online adaptive test. Now, in theory, they should be very similar. In fact, they should be really the same, but it gets interesting when you maybe have a difference between those two baseline measures. You know, do we have a really good average GCSE score, but maybe not quite as good online adaptive test result? Does that mean that the impact of the teaching that the students experienced when they were taking their GCSEs has actually enabled them to do better than what their actual ability would have maybe led them to achieve? So a lot of the time, this data is all about starting conversations, really, and that could be one. And as we've said, predictions, we know that these assessments are low stakes. They're nothing to be worried about, but when you start talking about target grades and everything, the stakes do go up a little bit, as you would expect. But we can predict to those high stakes subject exams. We can do A levels, AS levels, we've got IB standard and IB higher in there as well. And it's all about looking at the average high-stakes subject grade achieved by students in the past who have taken a Chem baseline test as well. That's the data that we're using to predict for new baseline testing students. Okay, so just a little bit more information about what we mean by an adaptive assessment. So basically, assessments react to the answers being given by the student. That's the principle behind it. The starting question that you see, so the starting question that a student will see is going to be an average difficulty question for whatever cohort they might be in. So a year 12 student, they're going to see an average difficulty question at the start of the adaptive sections of that test. So the adaptive sections are the vocabulary and the maths. So when the student sees the first question in each of those sections, their first question is going to be an average difficulty. How they respond is going to determine the kind of extra questions, the kind of questions they will move on to, the kind of questions they will be presented with. So there's algorithms that are working in the background. You never see the algorithms, but they are there, and they are looking at every answer that the student provides and choosing the most appropriate difficulty question to present the student with. So if we're doing well, then if we continue to provide correct answers, the questions that we see are going to increase in difficulty. But the reverse is also true. If we're struggling, if we do start to get questions wrong, again, the assessment is going to realize that, and it's going to present maybe slightly easier questions to the student. So it really does allow the students to show you exactly what they can do. You know, they might be going beyond the kind of difficulty question they would experience in a typical lesson, because this system is just going to be looking, as long as they're getting questions right, those questions will increase in difficulty. Okay, so just a little explanation about the kind of question areas, the component parts of the post-16 assessment. So we have ALICE available for 16 to 18 age range. We have vocabulary and maths. Those are the two adaptive question areas. And then we have the non-verbal section. Now the non-verbal is fixed. Everybody will see the same questions, maybe not at the same time, because the students will be working through the assessment at their own pace. The standard time vocabulary section will last for 10 minutes. The standard time maths will last for 25 minutes. The majority of students will not see all possible questions within the allowed time. You know, some students might see all questions inside of the 10 minutes or inside of the 25 minutes. They would then move on to the next question area. But the majority of students, it will time out before they have maybe seen all possible questions. Now, it is meant to work like that. So, you know, you would expect that to happen for the majority, and it's by design, basically. So the reason why we include these sections, you know, vocabulary is an important part of predictions when it comes to most subjects, especially important in the likes of English, history, and so on. You might find EAL students might not always have that high vocab score, but they can certainly demonstrate their ability in maybe the math section or the non-verbal that aren't as language centric as what the vocabulary is. Maths, again, it's going to correlate really well with most subjects. It's a very good predictor of final achievement. Both the vocab and the maths on their own would be a good predictor of potential future achievement. Combined, they provide that even stronger that even stronger predictive measure. In the non-verbal, we have pictures, speed and accuracy, dice, diagrams, and so on. Always good to have that kind of skill area within there. So pattern recognition, scanning and skimming, logical reasoning, things like that. And one extra feature of those non-adaptive sections is the students will actually see how long they've got left. So we know that all of these sections are timed, so when you're doing the vocab, you are told 10 minutes for this section, but what you don't see is the time running out. So you don't see the ticking clock in the adaptive sections, but you do when you get to the non-adaptive sections. Now, I always think that is a really interesting feature because it's going to give you potentially an indication as to how well the students have coped with that time pressure, because you don't have a great deal of time to do the questions in those non-adaptive sections. So it's just an additional thing to sort of keep in mind when looking at the results from the non-verbal sections. Keep in mind that the students will have seen how long they have left, and that has the potential to influence how the student has actually approached those sections. A few examples just to give a bit of an idea as to what the assessment sections actually look like. So the vocabulary, remember this is an adaptive section. So the students will see a couple of example questions to begin with, and then they will see the real questions. So what we're looking at here, we've got a target. It could be a picture, it could be a word, it could be a phrase, and we're just looking for the answer option that is the closest in meaning to whatever that target might be. If we get an example question wrong, the system will actually tell us what the right answer is. So the students do have to give a correct answer to the example questions. It's just so that we can be sure that they know what is required of them, how they're supposed to answer the questions. But when the real question starts, we won't know whether we've got them right or wrong. So we've got a little example question there. We've got another example question here. To leave, which one of those answer options is closest in meaning to that target? We simply choose which one we think is the correct answer. And then we move on to the math section. Excuse me. So the math section includes some multiple choice questions and some that we will have to type an answer into an answer box. So the example that we can see here is requiring us to type an answer into the answer box. This one is a multiple choice question where we basically choose which one of those answer options we think is the correct one. So we now get into the non-verbal question areas. Now these are non-adaptive, so every student is going to see exactly the same questions when they reach this part of the test itself. So we have pictures, so we've got matching pictures there, just looking for the straightforward match to whatever our target is. We include reflections and rotations in this matching section as well. We then move into speed and accuracy. So we might just be looking for the straightforward match of what that target is. So it could be, it's a sequence, it could be numbers, it could be characters, or it could be symbols like you can see here. So we could just be looking for the straightforward match to what the target is. But halfway through the section, we turn things around and we're now looking for the reverse match. Okay, so rather than start with the very happy face, we're now looking for starting with the slightly less than happy face. And just to tell you an idea as to how long you've got to do these, so in the speed and accuracy, you've got 5 minutes to do 20 of these, and they get very involved. They get really, really difficult, and that 5 minutes does go by incredibly quickly. We then have the diagrams. Now, I've got a better example of this one coming up, but this is by far my most favorite section of all of these tests. I think it's a really fun section to do. We've got a picture, and we've got letters. The letters have an impact on the shape, and you've got to logically work out what impact that is. In the example questions, we're told the impact, but when we see the real questions, we've got to work it out. But I've got a better example coming up. And then the final part is the dice. So we have a completed dice on the left-hand side, and then we've got 5 possible templates that have been used to make the dice that we can see. So if we had all of these printed out, we would just get a pair of scissors, cut the template out, and we'd be able to, physically construct the dice. It's a little bit different when you're trying to do all of that in your head, so you're trying to work out which of those templates you would use to make the dice that you can actually see. Now, we looked at these ones before, but this is a slightly better example that we've got. So we've got our shapes, we've got letters, and we've got to try and work out what is happening, to what impact rather the letter has on the shape. So as the shape passes through the letter, we've got to try and work out what impact the letter is actually having on the shape. Now, everything we need to work that out is on screen there. You've just got to logically think your way to it. Okay, so just looking at the left-hand side, if we were trying to find out what does J do, we can work it out. So we've got the white square, goes through goes through J even, and becomes a small white square. So J must change the size of the shape. So if we were looking to try and work out what impact K does, we have to sort of follow through and maybe work out what impact some of the other letters have in order to work out what impact the letter has that we're actually looking for. Okay, so everything's there. All that we need to know is on screen. We just have to work our way logically to what the answer might be. So really fun section, very enjoyable, at least I think so, and can't sort of guarantee everybody's going to think that's fun, but certainly I do really enjoy that. 5 minutes to do 15 of these. Okay, so you do have to work pretty quickly to try and get through 15 of those questions within the allowed time, or at least answer as many as you can within the 5 minutes allowed time that you have in the standard time version. Okay, so once we've taken the test, so the assessments, they are available as fully online or fully offline, depending on the confidence you have in your own bandwidth will determine whether you choose to run them over the internet or whether you choose to actually download the software onto your computer network and run them internally. The test itself is exactly the same. It doesn't matter to us whether you're using the fully online or the fully offline version. What the students will see will be exactly the same. But it's always good to have that offline version available just for peace of mind. If you do have any concerns about the connectivity between wherever you might be and Chem to return results and run the assessments and so on. So there is a plan B if there's any concerns about that. So once the assessments have been taken by the students, your feedback will be available within, I think the fastest that I have seen using Wi-Fi has been about 20 minutes, but I think it's actually quicker than that. So within sort of 10 minutes, I think you will have feedback once a student has finished the test. 10 10 minutes later, you should be able to go into the website and you can start and access your results. Okay, so we're not talking about a couple of days of processing time. It's incredibly quick now. Once the feedback is available, we have a few feedback files to actually look at. So we've got our standardized scores. It's going to allow you to look at your students' results and see how they compare to other students who've taken that same test. We have our visual attainment profile. So it's just taken our standardized scores data and presenting it in a slightly more visual way. So we do have examples of these coming up. We've got the cohort profiles. Good to be able to take that step back and look at the group performance, or maybe the cohort performance or class performance. We can look at that. We've got our predictions and chances graphs. So they are available from both baselines. So if you have uploaded the average GCSE result that a student has achieved, then you will be able to look at predictions from both of those baselines, the adaptive test and the average GCSE. And then the final piece of the data puzzle is the value added. So value added is simply the difference between predicted and achieved high stakes subject grades. Okay, so we can look and see, has the student achieved the kind of grades that we thought they would, that they were actually predicted from their Chem baseline test or their Chem baseline measure? Have they done a little bit better? Have they maybe not quite achieved the kind of grades that we thought they would? Is there any subjects where students have actually achieved higher grades? So a couple of little examples here. So we have a mixture of Excel and PDF feedback at the moment here. So the spreadsheet will actually detail all of the achieved standardized scores for the overall ALICE score, but also the component parts as well, the sections as well. So that's going to be really useful to identify whether we have a student who, for one of those sections of the test, their score just doesn't really look anything like the score that they have maybe achieved in one of the other sections. So, you know, I'm always looking for the consistency of students. You know, you look at my second student down there, we've got the overall standardized score of about 101. We've got their vocab score 99, their math score 101, their non-verbal score 99. So that's a fairly consistent result. But slightly different when we look at maybe the third student down. We can see, you know, 113 in the vocab, 108, 109 maybe in the non-verbal, and 139 in the math. So there's quite a difference there between those scores. We've got a definite high achieving math student in this example table here. So what we're looking for a mean standardized score of 100, so a completely average score of 100. Anything above 100 would be an above average score. Anything below 100 would be a below average score. There's some additional measures in there as well. So we've got sternines, percentiles that we can include. We've got bands. So taking our normal distribution of data and dividing it into 4 bands, A, B, C, and D, using quartiles. That's good when it comes to cohort profiles, to look at the kind of band distributions that we might have. We have that standard deviation of 15 that we use, which standard deviation is basically the dispersion of our results around that mean value of 100. And then, as we said there, we've got some additional measures, the bands, the sternines, and the percentiles as well. So we have the data in table format, like we can see here. And as I mentioned at the start there, it's looking for the consistency. Does one achieved scores stand out compared to maybe the rest of the student profile? Is it just for one student, or are we seeing that across all students in the group? You know, do we have a maybe a weakness in maths that is being shared by more than one student? So, you know, really good to be able to get that level of information. If you think about if it was only the overall score that you did see, would that be the complete picture of how the student performed in the test itself? Certainly the value is in the standardized scores, and the additional value in the standardized scores being presented and reported for all of the individual sections there as well. Just make sure that we are seeing the complete picture. So we have the table of scores, but we can also put those results. It's using the same data, it's using the standardized scores, but we can put them into a more visual picture. So we have a typical, you know, average scoring student here. We've got a student typically above average scores, with that mean line of 100 there. We can see all of our sections are above that mean line. And then we've got another student here who is slightly lower than average across all of the sections within the test itself. So we've got the table of standardized scores, but then we've got the more visual picture using the same data that we can see here. And then looking at the cohort profile, so using the bands A, B, C, and D that we can put the standardized scores into is giving us an idea of how does my current cohort of students compare to previous years. As many years as the school have been using the post-16 assessment, they will be able to look at something like this. So my current year 12 students, how do they compare to last year, to the year before? Am I seeing any trends developing? Do we have an increase in band Ds and a decrease in band As? So it's just going to give me an idea as to, you know, whether there's anything happening, and how does my most recent cohort of students compare to previous cohorts of students. And then moving on to predictions. So predictions and chances, we're looking at potential future subject exam performance, and we're going to look at that based on the average performance of those students in the past who have those two common data points. They've got a Chem assessment result and they've got a corresponding final subject exam result as well. Predictions are available, as we said, from both baselines, so you can get them from the average GCSE as the baseline and the online adaptive test as the baseline. And chances graphs show the percentage probability of a different exam outcome for the student. So there might be one that we think is the most likely outcome, but as we all know, that's not a guarantee that that student will achieve that grade. You know, they might do better, they might not do as well. That's where the chances graphs come into it. So this is basically how we generate a subject prediction. So for every subject that we can predict to, we're going to see a chart like this. This is basically what we use. So we've got our standardized scores, our Chem standardized scores on the x-axis and the achieved final exam grades on the y. For every subject, one of those stars is a genuine achieved final exam result for a student with the Chem baseline data point. We put a regression line through the middle of the data where we've got roughly 50% of our genuine results above and below the line. So imagine we have a student who has achieved, say, 120 in that ALICE post-16 Chem baseline test. That would be their predicted grade for whatever subject this might be. And we get to that grade by going up from 120, where we cross the regression line, that is the most popular achieved grade for that starting ability student. But we can see as we travel towards the green line, we actually go through students who didn't achieve that grade. And if we kept going beyond the green line, we would actually be going through students who achieved a higher grade. So predictions are just that. They're part of an overall chances scenario. You know, you might be one of the students who achieves that target grade, but you might do that bit better, or you might not do as well as that. So chances graphs just give us the idea as to the percentage probability of a different grade being achieved. So we've got a couple of examples here for A2 history and for IB higher English, looking at the chances graphs from both baselines. You know, so we do have on the left hand side, we've got the chances for those two subjects using the average GCSE as a baseline, and on the right hand side we've got chances that are using the online adaptive test as the baseline measure. So as we said, predictions are just that. They are using sound statistical data. We certainly wouldn't give a prediction if we're not confident that it is a genuine possible outcome for the student, but it's not a guarantee, as we know. It's not a guarantee that you will achieve that grade, and the chances graphs are designed to give you an idea as to what the probability is for that student achieving a slightly different grade. Now, just to finish off, I thought we'd just have a very quick look at value added. So value added is going to help us answer questions like the one we can see there. Have my students achieved the grades that their Chem baseline predicted? Have the subjects achieved their potential grade distributions? Have any subjects added more value to their students? Have any subjects struggled? Is there any best practice to be shared? Any subjects who have achieved positive value added, have they been doing something different that maybe can also be implemented by other subjects to see whether they can reap the same kind of rewards that our positive value added subject has actually achieved? So value added will be reported at individual subject and school level. So a little example file here, just to see what we're actually looking at here. So this gives us all of our subjects. Each one of those bars relates to an individual subject. So the bars will potentially change color depending on the significance of the exam results that have been achieved by the students. So where the bar has remained white, it's simply difficult to prove whether, you know, the positive exam results or the negative exam results are anything other than maybe a fluke performance, you know. So we just saying really that we don't have the evidence to determine whether those residuals are significant residuals. But we do, when we are able to be confident in that, then the bar will change color. Okay, so we know something very good is happening for our two north-facing bars, and maybe something not quite as good is happening for our below the zero line negative value added. Okay, so those two subjects, better than expected final exam performance that we can see there. Okay, and then the final chart that I was just going to have a little look at here was our statistical process control chart. So this allows us to look at the achieved value added for a subject over a number of years. So we're able to sort of, you know, determine whether there's something really good happening consistently with a subject, or whether we've seen a subject that is maybe starting to, performance-wise, is starting to dip. So we've got the actual residuals. The residual is simply the difference between predicted and achieved grades. We've got our confidence intervals here. Scores within the confidence intervals are not significant, but if we stray outside of those shaded areas, then that's an indication of the significance of the results that the subjects have achieved. So above the line, good practice to share. Maybe below the line, we might see performance that is below expectation. Okay, so that's going to be available. That chart is going to be available for all subjects where we can provide that measure of value added. Okay, so that's as far as I was going to go. So I'm just going to bring Megan back into the chat.
Hi, David. Thanks very much, and thank you to Suzanne as well. Just a reminder, if you do have any questions, please feel free to pop them in the question section or in the chat. We have had a question come through that is, are scores of students given extra comparable to no extra time? Well, sorry, let me start that one over again. Are scores of students given extra comparable to no extra time, and has that been standardized?
So all results are standardized. You know, it doesn't really make any difference to us whether a student has taken the standard time version or the extra time version. It's, you know, that is one of the reasons why it is really important to only assign the extra time version to those students who really need it. Because if you have a student who doesn't really need that extra time taking the extra time version of the test, then I would have serious question marks about the validity of their achieved result, because chances are if that student who shouldn't have done the extra time version did, chances are they would finish all of the sections, whereas they maybe wouldn't, which is what we would expect if they were to take the standard time version. Okay, so you would have to be really careful about who you choose to assign the extra time version to, but all of the results are standardized, and it's really for, you know, the schools themselves to be aware of which students did the extra time version, and obviously keep that in mind when you're looking at the results as well.
Yeah, I would say if you're deciding who you're going to allow to do the extra time version, it will be in line with students who would normally be given extra time in high stake exams like GCSEs and A-levels.
Great, thank you both. There's another question that's come through. Please, could you give an overview of the relative strength of correlations of the CABT and average GCSE predictions to final results? Are the predictions from the average GCSE worth using if you have both?
That's a really good question, because, you know, you will get predictions from both if you choose to tell us what the average GCSE results that the students have achieved are. So you will get predictions and chances based on both of those. As I said during the presentation, in theory, they should be both, you know, very similar, because the students should have achieved the kind of adaptive test score that maybe their average, the ability they have shown by their average GCSE should enable them to. But it's really interesting, you know, when we do have a difference between those two, either we have a really good online adaptive test score and not quite as good average GCSE, which would lead you to maybe think that, you know, why did that student not achieve better GCSE results? Because they're obviously a very able student based on how they have performed in that online adaptive test. And the reverse can also be true. You know, you might have students coming in with a really high average GCSE result, but when they do the online adaptive test, they don't do as well. Now, you know, keeping in mind that the online adaptive test is a single test done on that one day. So there's all sorts of things that can have an impact on maybe how you do in that. But, you know, remember the data, it's all about starting conversations, you know, how confident can I be in the average GCSE result that the student has achieved? How confident can I be that they have achieved those grades from their ability alone, rather than looking at maybe the impact that the prior teaching has had? So I think typically you would probably expect the average GCSE predictions to be a bit more accurate, because it is that prior measure of ability. But it's always worthwhile. The reason, you know, one of the reasons why we've got those two baseline options is just in case there's any question marks over that achieved average GCSE result. And that's where the online adaptive test comes into play, because that should be giving you a measure of the ability of the students at this particular point.
Great, thank you very much, David. I think those are actually all the questions that we've had come through. So I'd like to say a big thank you to Suzanne and David for presenting today, and to all of you for attending. We'll be sending the slides and the recording around within the next week or so, but if you have any questions or anything that popped into your head after the end of the webinar, please feel free to contact us at CEM, that's CEM, @cambridge.org. I think that's everything. Thank you very much for coming, and have a great rest of your day. Bye, everyone.
Bye. Thanks for joining us tonight. Bye.